All right, so we've talked about finding the right way to annotate a source, that is to say, describing and discussing what actually makes something work well. But let's also talk about best practices for searching. Fundamentally, when you're doing this research, one of the biggest things you need to understand is you need to figure out how much is doing my due diligence. Have I asked all the right questions? Well, here's the thing. You got to ask if your question's specific. You got to check to see if you're making the source type requirements for the assignment. Check to see if you've been doing enough keywords. Sometimes you need to actually change things up a little bit just to see if there's any extra sources that are going to be standing out there. Have you been searching good places? I hope you have. Do I have to worry about credibility issues or biases? Just have you seen a conflict of interest in any of these? These are all important questions that you're going to have to figure out. The best way I could describe it is your topic's going to have something like either a thesis statement or a hypothesis statement. Your thesis statement is a summation of what you think. If you have a big takeaway, that's what this is. A hypothesis is a possible explanation that is going to be tested. So that's something where you have more of a question that you want to test with that research. It's more like your research question, but a bit more specific. The big thing for you right now is to learn what the thesis of your research is going to be, and then say at the end of it, can I begin to answer this question with my 6 sources? Here's the thing. No source is perfect. Sources are going to change and going to develop as time goes on. Right here, you got something called hydroxychloroquine. I think y'all might be familiar with that. It was back in 2020. A lot of people thought it could be used to treat COVID. So I mentioned earlier pilot studies. A pilot study is just literally a study to see if there might be something that would be worth researching. So in China, you got a pilot study and it was peer-reviewed saying, okay, yes, this pilot study is something that is worth pursuing. Then you have positive finding in France, basing things on the peer-reviewed. Now, if you note how many patients, well, first, the pilot study, which is meant to be the small sample, is 30 patients. The French study had 6. That is 1/5 of the pilot study, which is meant to have less than your final survey. All of a sudden, somebody happens to say, hey, let's do another look. Well, like I said, yeah, you get by May of that year, people are saying, hey, we need to check this pilot study because it looks like we're not getting the same results. So the UK does a test with 1,561 people. When I say a study needs to have a large number of people, 1,561 is getting close. It's actually probably just a bit of a start. For instance, the World Health Organization also tests 954 patients are taking the hydroxychloroquine, 11,330 patients are not in the study, and it's double blind, which is a way of basically making it so no one knows who's getting the actual medicine. No benefit. By February of the next year, we have done research. We have found out that hydroxychloroquine has no evidence of treating COVID, despite the fact that there were 2 studies at the very beginning for a combined 36 people. They said it worked for 36 people. But as we were talking about with p-hacking and what the term significant means, that is entirely possible they got better due to random chance. When you look at evidence comes in kind of a pyramid shape. Well, you got the laboratory studies. Those are what they might call in vitro studies. That's in vitro means literally in glass, like a glass test tube. The point of those studies is a completely entirely controlled environment. It's like saying, yes, theoretically, bleach in a lab environment can kill COVID. That does not mean that bleach injected the body would even help. You move over to case reports, which are specifically going through and doing a long study of specific individuals. Then you look at the control cases, which are specifically what happened with people who did not have the different or X factor. In this case, with hydroxychloroquine, it would be what happened with the people who didn't take hydroxychloroquine. Then you go up to stuff like cohort studies and randomized controlled studies. Again, randomized and controlled means that it is going to be an attempt to remove as much random chance as possible and allow for better results. And finally, you've got systematic reviews. Systematic reviews are going through all of these other studies together and finding out how they work. Basically, it is a study of studies the way Galileo is a database of databases. To that end, let's talk about systematic searching. Let's talk about going through a study of studies and figuring out what they found. Right here, I've got a PDF. This is a PDF about animal bites that are not just cats, but really, I think this is a genuinely good enough review that I think it's worth talking about. Here's some things you need to know about it. Number 1, practical review of management and animal bites. These are all the people's names. You got the names, you got what this is published in, all that very clear right here. Like I said, the abstract is the beginning, middle, and end of the paper all explained. This abstract is itemized by the background, the methods, the results, the conclusions. It tells you everything about this study in brief. It gives you a short look at everything you're going to need to know about. This is extremely important when it comes to being able to sift through all of these crazy things, especially if it's a systematic review. This is a systematic reviews abstract, so they're talking about all the different things they went through. They're talking about stuff from studies worldwide. They're talking about PubMed PubMed, which is a huge database on medical research. The tables they present are going to be discussing different sorts of incidents, and they talk about what that data is about. This includes dogs, cats, horses, rodents, snakes, marine life, and spiders, including different sorts of pathogens associated with it. Then they go finally on conclusions based on what they know of the current studies. Now, the way you get through here, you can go through the database, and right here, take a look. Disclosure: Dr. Janis received royalties from Thien and Springer Publishing. The other authors have no financial interest to declare. That is an important thing. One of the big things you want to know is there some sort of conflict of interest, any of that sort of thing? And this is declaring it right here, right now, as clear as possible, which is a very good sign. The fact that it's not trying to hide anything and it says, hey, this person has received royalties from being published in these journals, that's something that's not as big of a problem that you need to worry about. Basically, what they're saying here is we reviewed stuff from journals that are published by the same publisher who has published stuff from Dr. Janis. I'm going to scroll down because we've got all sorts of stuff on here and all sorts of data, but let's talk about one way to really get into studying this sort of thing. Let's talk about the discussion. This right here is going to be what they want to have as the takeaway from their research. They talk about animal bites are a common cause of medical visits worldwide, yada yada. It cannot be ignored that many of the suggested treatments and protocols are not as easily administered in low and middle income countries and resource limited settings. The issues mainly stem from the limitations of ideal and proper treatment due to cost distribution and awareness of specific treatment modalities. Basically, they're saying, depending on how much money the area has, how much development, and how much infrastructure, treatment's going to change radically. And that's really important to know because what we're looking at is a study saying this is what our limitation is. They're saying this is an issue that is going to be a confounding variable. It is going to mess with our results. We want to keep on doing studying. We would like more people to keep researching this. This is talking about what the confounding variable is in all of the studies they looked at. They're saying this is something that we see as a common thread. This is something that we need to think, something that everyone researching this needs to look out for. This is a really cool and really helpful thing to see in a systematic review. Now, here's the other thing about the systematic reviews that are really good. They say it's limited due to the few high-quality studies published on animal bites. That's another thing. They say, hey, we need more studies on this to get good results. They're talking again about their limitations. The big secret to a lot of these studies is make sure they aren't trying to trip over their own shoes and get some info out there. This study is giving you all the qualifiers. They say, well, it varies by the income of the area. It's limited by how many high-quality studies there are. They're promising you that what they've reviewed is not going to tell you the end-all be-all of information. You need to keep researching because that's what researchers do. You will never get a full definitive answer that is perfect for everything, but you can take a look at the information provided and know if it's going to be useful. Which, speaking of which, let's take a look. I've actually looked through some of these sources. Issue with one of the first ones is that this link does not work anymore. That's a thing you need to keep an eye out for. Now, if I look up burns right here, this is on plastic and reconstructive surgery, and this is the actual discussion of this study. We found it right here. We've actually got the text on here that it is a free document. Information right here is available. What you don't see, though, is there's no abstract. This is much more of a periodical publication than a study. It does have conclusions. It does have a lot of this stuff, but it does not look like a peer-reviewed paper. Let's take a look at this. Well, right here, we've got an abstract that gives you breakdown of multiple things and different things, background, methods, results, conclusions, keywords, and of course, I can't get full text access right here without logging in or purchasing, but one of the things you can always do is go through and say, hey, let's see who wrote this. Julia Cook, Division of Plastic and Reconstructive Surgeries, Indiana University School of Medicine. So that's a real actual school, and she's a real actual researcher. All that MD means, medical doctor. That person's an MD and a doctor of philosophy. See, and they say that I go under affiliations, and they say all these things. We can look at this and say, yes, this seems like it is a solid research citation. I keep going through, and I am kind of spoiling this because I picked this one because it had good sources. Go through and make sure you find stuff that seems to make sense. A lot of times we have stuff where you'll go through and you say, wait, this is kind of a weird study. It'll come through when you look at its citations. One thing I will always remember is that the Netflix show Ancient Apocalypse has Graham Hancock on it. Graham Hancock, if you follow his citations, I am not kidding, has cited multiple times in his citations that he received messages from space while on drugs, and that is actually what he cites. It's just in the back of his book, and if you go to the back of his book, you all of a sudden see that, and you say, wait, that's not a source. What have I reading this entire book for? So you got to understand, track these citations down, go through your works cited, go through the works cited of the stuff you're citing, and you can follow through and find these things. There's a really good TED Talk, if you're okay with dealing with some very serious topics, about historians going through and discussing genocide denial in scholarly settings where they go through and find out that there are citations that are just citing each other back and forth forever without any actual original source. These are all very important things to know about, and this is why systematic reviews are important. You are going over the body of research in this subject.